She told my grandmother I was selfish, that I chose my career over family, that a woman who doesn't show up for the people who raised her isn't really a woman at all. That's what my mother said at Thanksgiving 3 years ago, right before she passed the rolls to my sister and pretended I wasn't sitting 2 seats down. My name is Mara. And if you've ever worked yourself half to death building something real, only to have the people closest to you act like it doesn't exist, stay with me. Have you ever been made to feel like the villain of a story you didn't write, only to walk into a room one day and realize you became the chapter nobody saw coming? The family court building on Ridgeway Avenue smelled like old paper and fluorescent lighting, the kind of place that runs on misery and continuances. I'd been in courtrooms like this hundreds of times, but never as a spectator. I came alone. No briefcase, no associate trailing behind me, no name badge clipped to my lapel. Just me, in a gray coat, sitting in the last row of gallery seats like I had no business being there. Which, technically, I didn't. My sister had her hearing at 2 o'clock. A custody evaluation dispute, her third in 18 months. The state was arguing she hadn't maintained the sobriety conditions attached to her parenting plan. Her lawyer, a man I didn't recognize, kept shuffling papers with the nervous energy of someone who knew he was underprepared. I hadn't been invited. My mother didn't even know I was in the city. I'd driven 3 hours that morning not to interfere, not to save anyone, and certainly not to perform forgiveness I hadn't reached yet. I came because I needed to see it. The machinery of accountability working the way it was supposed to. Because for 15 years, nothing in my family had ever worked the way it was supposed to. My sister sat at the respondent's table in a floral blouse she'd clearly pressed that morning. She looked thinner than the last photo I'd seen of her, which was a birthday post on social media I hadn't been tagged in. My mother was in the second row of gallery seats, clutching her phone in both hands like she was waiting for a verdict on something much larger than supervised visitation. I sat quietly, arms crossed, watching. The judge entered from the side door. She was in her early 60s, silver-haired, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. The kind of judge who didn't tolerate wasted time. She settled in, opened the file, reviewed for a long moment. Then she reached for her glasses, put them on, and looked up to scan the courtroom the way judges always do before proceedings begin. Her eyes moved across the gallery, past the second row, past the third, landed on me in the back. She stopped. I saw it before she said anything, the slight tilt of her head, the way her expression shifted from professional neutrality into something closer to recognition. She leaned slightly toward her clerk and said something I couldn't hear. The clerk looked up and found me too. Then the judge cleared her throat and said, slowly and clearly, "Before we begin, I need to note for the record that attorney Mara Chen is present in the gallery." The room didn't shatter the way I'd imagined a room could. It's sort of compressed, like all the air got pulled toward the center. My sister's lawyer turned around first, then the opposing counsel, then my mother, who had been looking at her phone, looked up at the wrong moment and found every pair of eyes in the room pointing toward the back row, toward me. I didn't move. I kept my hands in my lap and my face still. The judge continued. Miss Chen, for those unfamiliar, is the lead attorney who argued the Whitfield case before the state Supreme Court last spring. The precedent established in that ruling is currently central to the evaluation standards being applied in today's proceeding. My sister's lawyer made a sound that wasn't quite a word. As such, the judge said, removing her glasses, I need to ask, are you here in any professional capacity today? Because if so, this court has a problem. I stood. No, Your Honor. I'm here as a private individual. I have no involvement in this case. She studied me for a moment. Is there a personal connection to either party? A pause. The whole room waiting. The respondent is my sister. The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd heard in years. My mother made a sound like she'd been lightly struck. My sister turned around for the first time, and when her eyes found mine, her mouth went open, but nothing came out. Her lawyer leaned toward her and whispered something frantic. Opposing counsel was already on their feet, requesting a brief recess. The judge granted it. During the recess, I stayed in my seat. I didn't walk to the front. I didn't approach my mother, who had stood up and was now hovering in the aisle like she couldn't decide which direction to go. A court officer came back to where I was sitting and relayed a message the judge would like a word in chambers, informal, off the record. I followed him down the side hall. Judge Hargrove was standing when I came in, which I took as a sign of respect I hadn't expected. She gestured to the chair across from her desk and sat down when I did. "I apologize for putting you in that position in open court," she said. "You were doing your job. The Whitfield Standard is referenced 4 times in today's file." She paused. "You understand my position? Of course. You may want to consider recusal." She looked at me carefully. "I may. But I want to understand something first. You drove here alone. No representation. No notice filed. No bar number on any document in this case. You sat in the back row." She folded her hands. "Why?" I thought about how to answer that. About the 15 years of Christmas dinners where my chair was always the one closest to the door. About my mother's voice on the phone 3 years ago, saying, "You always were better at caring about strangers than your own blood." About my sister's wedding, I wasn't invited to because my mother told her I'd make it about myself. "I needed to see if the system works," I said finally. "Even when it involves someone I love." Judge Hargrove was quiet for a moment. Then she nodded, once, and said, "It does. But not today. With you in that room." She recused herself. The hearing was continued to a new date with a new judge assigned. My sister's case was not resolved, not dismissed, not influenced, just rescheduled, the way these things sometimes are when the machinery gets complicated. I walked back out through the side hallway. I didn't go back into the gallery. I walked straight toward the building's front exit because I was done observing, and because there was nothing left for me to do there. I was almost at the door when I heard my mother's voice behind me. "Mara." I stopped. I didn't turn around right away. I listened to the sound of her heels on the courthouse floor, quick and purposeful. The walk of a woman who had spent a lifetime getting to things before they could get away from her. When I turned, she looked smaller than I remembered. That's always the thing nobody tells you about confronting the people who made you feel small at some point. The math reverses. "You didn't tell me you were coming," she said. "You didn't invite me." She opened her mouth, closed it, looked around the hallway, as if there was a more comfortable version of this conversation somewhere nearby that she was hoping to find. "Your sister needs help," she said. "Real help, Mara. They could take the baby." "I know. Then why are you just standing there? You know people. You know judges. You could make a call." I looked at her for a long moment. At the woman who had, without ever raising her voice, made me feel like a guest in every room she occupied, who had a talent for distributing blame with the quiet precision of someone arranging flowers. You always ended up holding the one she didn't want. "I'm an attorney," I said, "not a fixer. And if I called in a favor to protect someone from consequences they earned, I'd be the exact thing you always said I was." She frowned. "What does that mean?" "Selfish," I said. "Making it about myself. My ethics. My career." I let that land. Except this time, I'd actually be doing it. She didn't have a response for that. Or maybe she did, and it just couldn't find its way out. I watched her cycle through 3 or 4 emotions that her face was too tired to fully conceal. "You were always like this," she said finally. It wasn't quite an accusation. It was more like a diagnosis she'd given up trying to treat. "Yeah," I said. "I was always exactly like this." I left through the front door. Outside, the afternoon had gone overcast and cool. No press, no cameras. Nobody cared about a continued custody hearing. I was just a woman in a gray coat walking to a parking garage. That was fine. That was more than fine. In my car, I sat for a few minutes before starting the engine. My phone had 7 missed calls. 2 from my mother, which I'd already expected, 3 from my sister's number, 2 from my aunt on my mother's side, who served as the family's unofficial communication director in moments of crisis and whose voicemails I had not listened to in approximately 4 years. I didn't call any of them back. I drove to my hotel, ordered room service, opened my laptop, and spent 3 hours reviewing briefs for a wrongful termination case with a hearing the following Tuesday. That was the work. The work that my mother once called a substitute for real life, by which she meant her version of my life, which involved living 30 minutes from her, attending every family function with the correct expression on my face, and never becoming anything so large that it cast a shadow over my sister. My sister, who was sweet and struggling, and had spent 28 years being told the world owed her gentleness. My sister, who had a beautiful daughter and a substance use problem, and a lawyer who shuffled papers too fast. My sister, who I loved in the complicated, grieving way you love someone you've been separated from, not by distance, but by your mother's choices. That night she texted me, "I didn't know you were coming." I looked at the message for a long time. "I didn't know either," I wrote back. "Not really." A pause. Then, "Did you come to watch me fail?" That one took me a while to answer. I set the phone down, looked at the ceiling, thought about all the ways I could answer it that were easier and less true. "I came because I still care what happens to you," I finally wrote. "Even when I don't know how to be in the room with you." She didn't respond that night. I didn't expect her to. The next morning, I woke up to an email from Judge Hargrove's clerk, formal correspondence, carefully worded. The gist of it was that my presence the previous afternoon, while unintentional in its disruption, had prompted a review of the evaluation criteria being applied in the case. New counsel had been assigned on both sides. The process, she wrote, would proceed with appropriate impartiality. She ended with, "The Whitfield Standard was designed for exactly this kind of situation." It held. I read that line 3 times. Then I got dressed, packed my bag, and checked out. On the drive home, my aunt called twice. On the 3rd attempt, I answered, "Mara, sweetheart, I know you're busy." That was always how she opened. A preemptive apology she never meant to apply to what came after it. "Your mother is beside herself. Your sister is terrified. The new judge is, well, they're saying he's very strict. And we all know you have relationships in that courthouse. We thought, maybe." "I'm going to stop you there," I said. A pause. "I don't have relationships I'm willing to use to circumvent a custody evaluation," I said. "What I do have is 15 years of work building a reputation that I'm not going to trade in so that my sister doesn't have to be accountable for what she's been doing." It's not about accountability. It's entirely about accountability. Her daughter is 4 years old. The court exists for the daughter, not for my sister, not for my mother, and not for me. Silence. "I love my sister," I said. "If she gets proper support and demonstrates she can maintain sobriety, she'll get her parenting time back. That's how it's supposed to work. And my being involved wouldn't make that better. It would just make it faster. Those are different things." My aunt was quiet for a moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer, less rehearsed. "I didn't know you'd turned out like this." "Like what?" "Like someone with a spine," she said. And I couldn't tell if she meant it as a compliment or a warning. "I've always had one," I said. "Nobody in this family asked to see it." I got home at 7 that evening. My apartment was quiet in the way I'd spent years learning to appreciate the kind of quiet that comes from choosing your space carefully. Bookshelves along every wall, a desk by the window, a kitchen that smelled like the rosemary plant my neighbor had given me when I made partner 3 years ago. Nobody had called to congratulate me when that happened. I'd told my mother, and she'd said, "Well, you always were more comfortable with work than with people," as if those were opposites, as if the reason I worked was because I'd failed at something else. I poured a glass of water, stood at the kitchen counter, and let the day settle around me. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I didn't recognize. "This is Daniel Forsyth." I was assigned as new counsel in the Reyes matter. I want you to know that I've reviewed the file thoroughly, and I intend to ensure this process is handled with complete integrity. I don't know what your presence yesterday was about, and I don't need to. But whoever you are, the Whitfield standard you established is the most important thing in that courtroom. Thank you for it. I didn't know who had given him my number or how. I sat down at my desk and read the message twice. Then I wrote back. Make sure she gets access to good treatment resources, not just supervision requirements. That's the part most plans get wrong. He responded within a minute. Already on it. I set the phone down and looked out the window at the city going dark around me. The following week, I was at a legal aid conference in Washington, speaking on a panel about systemic gaps in family court representation. Midway through the Q&A, a young attorney in the second row couldn't have been more than 2 years out of law school, raised her hand and asked how I'd handled the moments early in my career when the people in my personal life didn't understand what I was building. I thought about my mother's voice. I thought about the courthouse hallway. I thought about sitting in the last row with my hands folded, watching. I stopped trying to explain it to them, I said, not because they didn't deserve an explanation, but because I realized that the explanation would never be enough. Some people need you to stay small so they can stay comfortable. And at some point, you have to decide who you're living for. The room was quiet in that particular way that means people are writing something down. 3 days after I got home from the conference, my sister called. I almost didn't answer, but something, the same instinct that had driven me to that courthouse, the part of me that still had a file in her name, made me pick up. I'm not calling to ask for anything, she said immediately. Her voice was different, quieter, like something had been removed from it. I just needed to say, I know what it cost you to be there, and I know you didn't come to help me. But you came, and that meant something I don't know how to explain. I sat down on the edge of my desk. I start outpatient next Monday, she said. Real outpatient. 3 days a week. Not the thing Mom found online. Okay, I wanted you to know. I'm glad you told me. A pause. The particular silence of two people who are related and estranged and trying to find the version of themselves that can exist in the same sentence. Mom thinks you're punishing us, my sister said. I know. Are you? I considered it, honestly, the way you can only do in a conversation that's stripped of performance. No, I said. I just stopped rearranging myself so she'd be comfortable. That's not punishment. It just feels that way to someone who got used to having me smaller. My sister was quiet for a moment. Then, I was part of that. I let it happen. I let her do it, and I didn't say anything. I know that too. I'm sorry. The 2 words sat between us, not quite filling the space, but at least acknowledging its size. Get through Monday, I said. That's what matters right now. She exhaled, long and shaky. Okay. We didn't make plans. We didn't declare anything new. But when I hung up, something in the room felt different. Not fixed. Not resolved. Just opened. The way a window feels when you've pushed it up for the first time after a long winter, and the air that comes in is neither warm nor cold, just present. My mother called the following Saturday. I let it ring. Then she called again. I let it ring again. On the 3rd call, I answered, not because I was ready, but because I'd decided to stop running from things I could actually face standing still. You made your sister cry, she said by way of hello. My sister called me, I said. We had a real conversation. That's not the same as making someone cry. You've never understood how hard it's been for her. I understand exactly how hard it's been for her, I said. I also understand what made it hard, and I'm not interested in pretending those are separate things. My mother made a sound of exasperation. Everything has to be so clinical with you, so calculated. Would you prefer emotional? I said. Because I have that too. I just stopped performing it for you when I was about 24. That's not fair. No, I said. None of it was. She went quiet. And in that quiet, I could hear her cycling through the angles, looking for the one that would reframe this back into a story where she was the one who'd been failed. She was good at it. She'd had years of practice. I only ever wanted what was best for both of you, she said finally. I know you believe that, but you don't. I believe that you had one idea of what best looked like, I said. And it happened to fit my sister perfectly and never fit me at all. I don't think you did it on purpose. I don't think you're a villain. I paused. But I'm also not going to keep pretending it didn't happen. Silence. I've built something real, I said. Not to prove anything to you. I stopped needing to prove things to you a long time ago. I built it because it mattered. Because kids in family court without representation lose custody of their parents, and parents without representation lose custody of their kids. And someone has to care enough to fix that system. That's what I do. That's who I am. And if the price of you being comfortable is me pretending that's smaller than it is, then we're going to keep having this conversation. My mother didn't say anything for a long moment. I didn't know it went that far, she said quietly. The legal work, I didn't know it was that significant. You never asked. Another silence. Longer this time. Something different in it. Your father saw you on television, she said, almost reluctantly. After the Whitfield decision came down, he recorded it. He watches it sometimes. A pause. He doesn't know. I know. I sat with that for a moment. My father, who had spent 20 years being a quiet passenger in whatever direction my mother steered, had recorded a segment about my Supreme Court argument and watched it in private. There was something in that so unexpectedly human that I had to look at the ceiling to keep my composure. Tell him he can just call me, I said. She made a sound that might have been a laugh. Small, uncertain, unfamiliar from her direction. I don't know how to do this differently, she said. I know. But I'm not asking you to do it perfectly. I'm just asking you to stop asking me to disappear. She didn't promise anything. I didn't ask her to. We ended the call without resolution, without warmth, but without warfare either. Something in the middle that had the fragile quality of something new, not yet strong enough to hold weight, but present in a way it hadn't been before. I framed something that week. Not an award, not a photo of myself at a podium. A printout of an email I'd received 2 years before from a woman named Patricia, whose daughter had been placed in foster care at 6 years old and returned to her at 8 because a custody evaluation had been conducted using the Whitfield criteria my team had spent 4 years fighting to establish. The email was 3 sentences. She remembered me, she said, Mom. I got to be her mom again. That was on my wall now. Next to my bar admission certificate, 2 pieces of paper, different sizes, same weight. 2 months later, my sister completed her first phase of outpatient treatment. She sent me a photo of her daughter at a park, the little girl mid-leap off a small wooden bridge, arms flung wide, absolutely fearless. No caption, just the image. I looked at it for a long time. Then I saved it. Because here's what they never tell you about being the one who left. The one who got quiet. The one who built something in the silence they mistook for defeat. It's not a revenge story. It was never a revenge story. Revenge would have meant I needed them to lose in order for me to win. And I stopped needing that somewhere in my late 20s when I realized the math of it never works out even. What it actually was, every long hour and unreturned call and holiday I spent alone in my apartment ordering takeout and working on case briefs, was a choice, a slow, unglamorous, sometimes lonely choice to become someone whose foundation didn't depend on their approval. And you don't feel that choice happening. You don't feel it the way you feel, the dramatic moments, the courthouse recognition, the judge saying your name, the room going still. You feel it later. In the small things. In the fact that your sister's text makes you smile instead of brace. In the fact that your mother's voice on the phone no longer sounds like a verdict. In the fact that you can sit in a quiet room at the end of a long day and feel, genuinely and without performance, that you are enough. Not because the world confirmed it, because you decided to stop waiting for it to. I'm not a woman who needs a seat at the table they built. I spent 15 years learning how to build my own, and now I know how to build them for other people too. That's the work. That's what I do. And it turns out the thing they called too serious, too cold, too ambitious, too much, it was always exactly enough. It was just never for them. It was for the woman who gets to hear her daughter say mom again. It was for the 4-year-old girl leaping off a bridge in a park, arms open, absolutely unafraid of the fall. It was always for them.